starting point for the association between royal power and the Church takes place in the 5th century with the baptism of King Clovis, King of the Franks. It marked the conversion of the country to the Christian faith and is the origin of the sacred nature of the royal power. The kingdom gained a nickname, the eldest daughter of the Church. This was following the first baptism of a barbarian king. From there, the story of the nation of France and the Church is interwoven. Slowly, rituals took place to symbolise this alliance. Accession to the royal throne was legitimised by a ceremony of anointing. This was performed by the Archbishop of Reims, a ceremony very reminiscent of the anointing of King Clovis. However, the French kings, who were eager to defend their rights from the intrusions of Rome, developed a doctrine regarding the organisation of the Church in France. This was called the Gallicanism. While not contesting the Pope's spiritual primacy in the Church, it restrained his authority when nominating bishops, archbishops, abbots, and priors. It also gave the French clergy some independence from Rome. From the French Revolution in 1789 to the Concordat of 1801, the governments put in place policies to de-Christianise the country. They exacted this by appropriating church lands, paying the clergy salaries, exiling or even executing the recalcitrant, and sponsoring different forms of cult, like the cult of the Supreme Being. Then, Pope Pius VI condemned the revolutionaries, viewing them as enemies of the Church. The quarrel culminated with the revolutionary army led by young Napoleon invading Italy, defeating the papal troops and capturing the Pope in 1796, 7 years after the revolution. The Concordat of 1801, which was signed between Napoleon and the papacy, lasted until 1905. Basically, it was an act of reconciliation between the revolutionaries and the Catholics. Roman Catholicism was declared to be the religion of the majority of the French citizens. The Church had the freedom to exercise worship in public, but the ordained staff were paid salaries and asked to swear oaths to the state. The coronation of Charles X in 1825 marked a will to return to the past and to bypass any changes made by the Revolution and the Empire. It was also a period that saw the reinforcement of ultramontanism, a doctrine that put strong emphasis on the powers and prerogatives of the Pope over the secular power. A law voted on in April 1825 punished anyone guilty of sacrilege by death. While it was never applied, it was enough to reinforce the anti-clericalism of the Parisian crowd, who were growing weary of this type of governance by the Church. From the Revolution of 1830, for 40 years, until 1870, slowly the ultramontanist sympathisers looked at the papacy as a source of guidance. This was because the different governments had been less than supportive of their aspirations so far. After 1870, with the Third Republic, starts a new phase in the anti-clericalism rhetoric, and it widens the gap between the state and the Church. In 1877, Leon Gambetta, one of the most famous figures of the era, declared, "The clericalism, here is the enemy." In the meantime, the Church had reaffirmed the doctrine of the infallibility of the Pope. In 1864, the syllabus had reaffirmed the superiority of the Church's spiritual power over the temporal power. The Republic reacted, limiting its influence through different laws, ordinances like the suppression of the displaying of crosses in schools, for example. Jules Ferry, Minister of Education and an ardent atheist, sponsored a law that created a public, free, and non-religious education. In July 1901, a new law recognises the freedom of creating voluntary associations of any kind but religious. any association with religious affiliation would need the approval of the authorities. Emil Coombs sponsors a law blocking the option of the profession of teaching to the priests, meaning that there could not be a crossover between preaching and teaching within an education environment. Finally, in 1905, the law of separation between the state and church was voted. It applies to Catholicism, Protestants, and Jewish institutions.